There has been a lot of Clone Trooper minifigures over the years, far too many to include in one video, so we'll just stick to the 501st. Even then, the pool of minifigures is still fairly large for a category this specific, so I thought I'd rank them from worst to best. Just some rules: no named clones. Mainly because I didn't fancy parting with a small fortune. Secondly, bear in mind I won't be necessarily ranking by accuracy, just overall figure quality. Also, just one last thing before we get started. A what? My first observation is this minifigure is boringly simple. I am not charmed by the classic look of this minifigure, though perhaps that's just by comparison. The torso and legs are kind of bland. The torso print in particular just lacks the visual interest of that updated 2020 design. I just have that down to the details lacking contrast, leading to the whole printing just looking flat. The helmet is also no good to my eye. I understand what they were going for, but it didn't translate very well. The printing on the face of the helmet just looks so bunched up and thin, which I feel didn't translate as well as they would have hoped. I will say the blue arms do serve this figure really well, and I'm disappointed they aren't a staple of 501st minifigures, which we'll get into later on in the list. Next is the 332nd Trooper, technically speaking a 501st clone. It's above the old animated style as the torso printing is vastly improved, but ultimately beneath the figure that debuted that printing. This is because the helmet print is not that great. The markings on the forehead don't look particularly pleasing, with its unsightly gap in the centre and the copious negative space boldly framing the printing. I did try and avoid talking about accuracy, as there needs to be some level of adaptation in order for the character to work in LEGO, but without adhering to the design in the show, it's ultimately just some orange blobs. Given the limitations, it's possible 332nd Troopers are incredibly difficult, or just impossible to adapt into LEGO. To my eye, it doesn't represent what makes that clone trooper so unique. Next up is that aforementioned 2020 501st Clone Trooper. I would like to add that from this point onwards, I would consider the minifigures to be good, at the very least. That 2020 Trooper is pretty much just an upgrade to the previous animated attempt, and a great template as you'll see when we get higher up this list. The figure fixes the helmet with printing that works so well for these LEGO minifigures. The torso print looks amazing, very nice detailing that actually pops. We have that much needed contrast with the elements on the torso print, which adds a lot of visual interest. We have feet printing, which is good to see, and overall the figure quality is quite good. The only thing that I could bring up is that the white is a little overpowering. I would have loved to have seen those blue arms return, and the minifigures that rank higher prove how great it looks. But otherwise, decent figure. Next is the Officer. As you'll see, that 2020 Trooper is used and adapted to various degrees of success, and that starts with the Officer. Right away, the additional blue elements on the chest do a nice job of breaking up that endless sea of white. The extra blue does continue around to the back as well, which is nice. As you'll see, the clones further up the list have differing ways of tackling that sea of white. Though, bringing things back to the Officer, we have that printed waist cape. It certainly is disappointing, but the printing is pretty good and adds a level of detail to the legs, though ultimately the modifications to the base design are polite compared to what's next. What is next is the Clone Heavy Trooper. The minifigure features a forehead print that looks quite nice, and I enjoy the differences it brings. Moving to the torso, we have the great addition of various straps and extra little details that also continue around to the back. I ultimately rank this figure higher as I like how the additional printing implies a specialized role. I also think that the printing just looks a bit nicer. I will say that the backpack is not doing anything for me. It's a nice little detail, but I didn't know what it was for the longest time. Entering the top 3, we have the 501st Clone Specialist. This perfects the standard 501st Clone Trooper. The Specialist reintroduces blue arms, showing just how well it breaks up the white and adds variation to the figure. The visor on this clone looks amazing. Weird to think we didn't get such a staple clone accessory until just last year. The Specialist is the closest to that template out of the entire bunch, but the additions it makes lifts it above all those other clones to produce the most pleasing to my eye. Next up, we have just about the coolest clone trooper LEGO will never give us again, the 501st Clone Pilot. This helmet mold is too cool. LEGO is absolutely never giving us something like this again, what with their aim to standardize clone helmets as much as possible. However, this doesn't take away from how amazing the one we got is. This so perfectly captures the look in LEGO form, with fantastic printing to top it off. It's nice to see some of that standard clone helmet mold bleed into this design, as if it's the base the pilot helmet was built off of. The helmet is truly fantastic. It's a shame the rest of the figure is a little bland. A pretty much plain white clone pilot torso and more egregious plain white legs. They certainly get the job done, but the torso and legs ultimately prevent this figure from being number one. Lastly, at that coveted number one spot, we have the 501st Jet Trooper. This is the finest looking 501st Trooper LEGO has ever printed. The blue chest plus those blue arms satisfyingly balance the white to make this the most visually pleasing 501st torso out of the bunch. The addition of the extra blue all over the helmet looks great, as well as being complemented amazingly by the little dash of red. From what I understand, this figure is incredibly screen accurate, which didn't affect my opinion, but just highlights how well this figure was adapted if all the great design choices of the original were preserved. The printing on this figure works so well as this complementary package, leading to, in my opinion, the best 501st clone minifigure. And with all that being said, thank you for watching.